Well, if all this talk of climate change has been eating at you, wait till you hear a suggestion from a Swedish scientist. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, I want to get this guy's name right. I believe it's Magnus Söderlund, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that since I don't speak Stockholm. But he is from the Stockholm School of Economics. He's a professor of some sort, and he was speaking recently at a gastro summit focused on the food of the future and suggested that because of the effects of climate change and in order to take on climate change, we must, quote, awake the idea that eating human flesh should be discussed as an option for the future. Let me just get your initial response to the concept before we go into detail.
Well, I guess suppose on deep reflection, my initial response would be, it's people! Soylent Green is people! You're supposed to be outraged at that. That's supposed to make you sick. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, because you were born in a different millennium than I was, Soylent Green was a movie back from, I want to say, late 70s maybe, about a future dystopian society where everybody eats this material called Soylent Green, and through heroic efforts on the part of Charlton Heston, we discovered that Soylent Green, which is what everybody's been eating, is just reprocessed human corpses. And so, once again, truth is stranger than fiction.
You get the sense that Hollywood is unable to step outside of the bounds of human depravity, don't you?
I often get that feeling. In fact, I get that feeling pretty much minute by minute. And then, it's funny, Hollywood, which is such a depraved place. Now, the nice thing about fiction is designed to warn us. So this is the thing that's so depressing about this particular story. Soylent Green was made essentially, I don't think Soylent Green was made with a specific social purpose in mind.
You mean the movie, not the food?
Yes, the movie. No,
yeah.
Sorry, yes, the movie. The movie was made because it played off of one of the most deeply rooted instinctual inhibitions that we have, and that is cannibalism. And that's what made that movie work, was the power of finding out what this stuff actually was. And so Hollywood is making that movie not to recommend Soylent Green. Soylent Green wasn't made so we could all awaken the idea of eating each other once we've died, presumably once we've died, although you never know with these people. It was designed to horrify us on a base level that resonated so strongly that the movie would become a success, and it has become a success. And that line, Soylent Green is people, is part of the pop culture now because of that revulsion. So when you hear things like this from Swedish scientists, you can only imagine my surprise when I found out it was a Swedish scientist. You really have to start asking yourself why you aren't fully armed yet.
Well, Bill, the scientist Magnus Söderlund says that we are the biggest impediment to this is really the conservative taboos against eating human flesh. Do you think it's going to be you and your conservative friends that are going to prevent us from surviving climate change?
That question is a non sequitur. I do think the conservatives have a better chance of surviving anything compared to progressives, not only because we're far better looking and far smarter, but also because we have a moral code that is more protective of everybody. But with that said, this is not an either-or situation. The way you pose the question is, which one would I prefer, dying from the overheating of the planet, or finding out that my Aunt Marty is probably nice with a little, virgin olive oil and maybe a little, Parmesan on the side. I don't have to accept either of those options, and I don't.
Well, and at this point anyway, Bill, Mr. Söderlund is not talking about going out and, sort of farming and harvesting people. He's just kind of saying we should get over our conservative taboo against consuming the dead.
Well, he's wrong. And the fact that he is, and see, here's the thing, Scott. The fact that he could make that kind of a claim, and that you often hear progressives making these kind of claims. You hear progressives saying things like a woman should have a right to abort a child up to a year after it's born, this kind of thing, This is insanity speaking aloud. This is not like some thought that you might have and just go, whoa. This is human insanity speaking aloud. And I'm not surprised it comes from Sweden, where without question, I think you can say that the Scandinavian countries are socialism at its best. Sweden was, and I've made this case many times, but put that aside, it is essentially a daycare center where you are taken care of from birth until death by the state. So that gets to let you know who the boss is, first of all. And secondly, it's my personal belief that what all of these progressive elites are really suffering from, aside from a case of clinical narcissism, is boredom. They're just bored, and they just want something to happen. And I think this very well explains the spectacular success of zombie movies in the last 10, 20 years, apocalypse of the Earth movies. There was a period on Discovery Channel and back when it was actually about science, where there were probably, 5 or 6 documentaries about what will happen when humanity's gone. 4 years after man, 200 years after man. People are just obsessed by it, and they're obsessed by it because they're bored. And somebody of all the many lines I've heard online that just went flinging past me in the giant tornado of information that I live in, this one more than anything, I think I wish I could have gotten the attribution for. I just didn't catch who said it. But whoever said it, wasn't me, said that when society no longer has adventure, then the only adventure is to destroy society. And I think that's absolutely right.
Bill, you have said before, and I think you were quoting Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit, who basically said that he'll believe all the scares words about climate change when he sees the advocates of it beginning to behave in accordance with it. Isn't this just an example of that? I mean, if you really believe that the climate is being destroyed by human activity, and frankly, that we're beyond the point of no return at this stage, doesn't the mind naturally go to survival and say, for example, as Magnus Söderlund is saying, we need to be ready to eat more insects, to eat more worms, and I'm seeing more and more stories about the delicious ways that you can do that in the news. We also need to be willing to consume our pets and perhaps our relatives. Isn't this just a natural progression of this view that the planet is being destroyed and we need to get ready?
It's got really nothing to do with whether or not the planet's being destroyed. That worldview is a worldview that can be applied to any emergency. So that's the worldview of being shipwrecked on an island without enough food. That's the worldview of being in a lifeboat. That's the worldview of a famine that won't end. So it's not directly tied to global warming, and that's an important point to make because of the way I want to respond to this. That worldview is repugnant and reprehensible to me, and I think it is to most people of conscience. That worldview is predicated on the idea that there is nothing more important than your personal survival. That no matter what the situation is calls for, doing that is better than dying. And I don't believe that. I would rather die than kill my children and eat them.
It's a materialistic worldview, isn't it, that says this is the end of all things.
But maybe that's just a conservative kind of a taboo I have. Maybe I should awaken to the idea of being able to eat children, my children especially. Maybe that's just a conservative kind of a rigid kind of a thinking that I need to overcome and get with the new program. Because when I hear things like this, I realize I'm talking with people who have that opinion that no matter what happens, you have to survive. Kind of ironic, isn't it? They always accuse conservatives of being these survivalists and rammed up and gunned up and stuff. Yeah, we are. And it's true that if there is ever an economic collapse, the conservatives are going to do a lot better than the liberals in the cities are. But my point on this is, if we ever run out of beans and the cities run out of beans, the cities are going to eat their children, and the conservatives are going to die as a family with some honor and some dignity.
Bill, Magnus Söderlund is smart enough to understand that not everybody's going to go in for this. In fact, especially people with conservative taboos, aplenty like you. However, he does seem to think that if people were introduced to the taste of human flesh little by little, that there'd be enough takers.
This guy belongs in a hospital. Did he actually say something like that?
This is not as a quote, but it's a summary of what he's saying. And by the way, I should give attribution here to this website, just in case it turns out to be a big fraud. Website is called bigthink.com. The article was written by Paul Ratner on September 8th of 2019.
You see, what this ultimately is, when you get right down to it, is it is the ultimate manifestation of a particular kind of virtue signaling. Most of the virtue signaling we see in America is virtue signaling of I'm a better person than you are, you're mean and I'm loving. This kind of virtue signaling is the virtue signaling of somebody trying to show how stratospheric their intellect is, how they're unbound by human constraints of emotion, that they've achieved some kind of, breakthrough in consciousness that allows them to easily consider options that those poor, benighted savages simply can't wrap their primitive brains around, and that's what's going on here. And the great, it's so much irony, it's almost a joke, is that it's not that people with consciences didn't consider the idea that if things get bad, we may have to eat our family. It's that people with consciences have come to the decision that if things get that bad, we're not going to eat our family, that there are some things worse than dying, and that's one of them. And that's the thing that I find most shocking about this is the sheer pretension on the part of this guy, thinking, if things get really tough, we may have to eat one another. And I know you conservatives have never thought about any of that. No, we think about this quite a lot, actually. We think about tough times quite a lot. And I think I'm speaking for everybody watching this program who's on our team anyway, when I say that yes, there would desperate situations would cause desperate reactions, but there is a line that would not be crossed. And I'm only speaking for myself here, but I am 100% certain that there are many things that I would die to avoid doing. Many things. To make the argument is just the ultimate form of ego stroking and it's a sign of a guy who's really not well,
And Bill, perhaps the whole thing is merely a rhetorical device to introduce the ultimate fear into a situation because he wants people to take action when it comes to climate change. If you're a member of the House of Representatives in the United States, I think that maybe within 5 years, I could see a Democratic representative introducing a bill to allow the U.S. Department of Agriculture to regulate the processing of human flesh for human consumption.
And I guess we know what party would sponsor that bill, don't we?
Well, my suggestion was that it would be the Democrats, but it just, not because they're serious about it, but because they think they've got to find a way to wake you people up to the seriousness of climate change.
Okay, so what does that tell you about people that are willing to do that? What does it tell you about people who are willing to advertise that the most primal restrictions on abominable behavior are on the table?
They love you and they want to save your life.
In order to get well, if they love me and they wanted to save my life, if their theory is correct, the first thing they'd stop doing is flying their private jets to global warming conferences, right? And Barack Obama wouldn't buy a new house on the seashore, right? And if global warming and rising sea levels are really the end of the planet, who's going to get hit hardest? Who lives on the shore, Scotty?
In the United States, it's the very wealthy.
And in most countries, it's the very wealthy. Yes. So when I see rich people selling their beachfront property at fire sale prices, when I see people like Leonardo DiCaprio walking or riding a horse, or at the very least taking a train to a global warming conference, because the evidence is so overwhelming that he realizes that not only is his jet contributing carbon to the problem, but also the fact that he has got a private jet in the first place. It just looks bad. So the fact that none of them are doing any of this is telling me is exactly what Glenn Reynolds said. When they start behaving like it's a crisis, I may start to believe it's a crisis. But when Al Gore has, 6 times the amount of electrical use as his neighbors in Tennessee, this is 2 years after An Inconvenient Truth, what does that tell you? If I told you that eating cherries was the end of the earth, that if we continue to eat cherries at the rate we're eating cherries, then there will be no human life on this planet in 10 years. And then you find out I'm eating 6 times more cherries than the people that live next to me. What does that tell you?
Well, the members at BillWhittle.com are the kind of people who hear this sort of alarmism and say, hey, let's start a real estate investment trust to buy up those oceanfront properties that the rich people will be abandoning at fire sale prices.
And also, let us be crystal clear about this. We are also the same people that are more than willing to provide the money to film a documentary of this gentleman basically rendering himself into food for other members of this Swedish committee, and we'd be happy to film that at our expense, and also film the kind of the wine and cheese tasting party that comes before the big event, you know?
Well, in this world, Bill, there are producers.
Don't eat the pate.
There are producers and consumers. The consumers are those people who are enjoying these videos for free on YouTube, hundreds of thousands of them around the world. And the producers are the members at BillWhittle.com who actually fund the production. And
the other ones are cannibals, I say.
And neither the twain shall eat. If you'd like to move from being a consumer to a producer, we invite you to do so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.